Hello, everyone. Gunita here from the 1947 Partition Archive. Welcome to day 47 of the 75 Days of Partition. Today, I am going to interview Sonam Kalra, who you've been seeing as an interviewer on our show. There she is, the wonderful Sonam Kalra. Sonam has done some incredible work on partition, and I think she deserves a show of her own. We've never actually interviewed her. She's always been on the other side. She's been the interviewer. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of an introduction, and I've written it down here. So pardon me if my eyes are kind of looking away. So Sonam is an award-winning singer and composer, and she's based in Delhi. She's a creator of the award-winning Sufi Gospel Project, as well as a much acclaimed multidisciplinary experiential performance on the 1947 partition titled Partition Stories of Separation, that revisits the partition using music, poetry, prose, oral history, art, and theater. And let me tell you that is where I met Sonam in Delhi several years ago. It is a phenomenal performance. It blew me away. Just the combination of the light show, the music, everything. It's put together so well. I mean, the audience was in tears. The audience, was just absolutely captivated. And I was one of those audience members that was blown away. So Sonam, that was so talented and beautiful. So I can't wait to learn about your journey and your connection to partition. So let's start with that. Since we've been focusing on so many other people's personal connections,
I just wanted to say thank you, Gunita, for this lovely introduction. But I also want to make let everyone know that I actually, before I met Gunita, I knew of Gunita because of the incredible work that she was doing with the 1947 Partition Archive. And I reached out to the 1947 Partition Archive because the stories were so incredible. And she was kind enough to give me some of those stories to use. And honestly, I have to thank you because in the sharing of those oral histories in my performance, it is what makes it that much more real. It makes it that much more moving for people to see. Coming back to my connection with partition, so essentially, Gunita, my family, most of it seems to be from that side. My mother's side was from Rawalpindi. My father's side was from Sargodha. Growing up, I didn't really hear anything negative about partition. My grandmother always told me of this amazing land called Rawalpindi, where she was studying, she was going to college, she was doing her bachelor, she used to ride her own tanga. I mean, emancipated, wonderful, free life. Somehow we were never told of the horrors of partition. And so to me as well, I often wonder, what is it that drew me and what is it that always made me from very, very deep within yearn to find out more about the other side. And I know that when the first time I visited Pakistan was during the cricket match, when they'd opened the gates of Mohali, the gates for the match, not in Mohali, sorry, it was at the Wagah border, and we went across. But before that, I have to go back. When they first opened the gates for the Mohali match, and I think that was possibly 2000, I can't remember, 4 or 14, there was this beautiful image that was captured by a photographer of a newspaper. And I think that is what triggered everything for me. There was a man carrying his daughter on his shoulders, and they were crossing from the other side, coming to the Indian side. And in the daughter's hands was a placard which read, "Akhyan di lali das diye, roye asivi, roye to sivi." The redness in your eyes shows that you have cried, and so have we. And I don't know, that just impacted me to the core. And every time I would find myself telling people about that as well, I would be brought to tears. And I kept saying, why am I so moved by these lines? And I think I knew at that time that I had to explore those lines. I had to do something through music to understand the very pertinence, the poignancy, the depths of those lines, and to me, that just sums up partition more beautifully and more sadly as well than anything else. So that was really the connection. And then when I got a chance to go with my Sufi Gospel Project, I got invited to sing at the first Fairs Peace Festival to Lahore. And when I crossed the border, I think by foot then, there was another defining moment for me. I had one foot on either side and I started to weep. And I couldn't understand why I was weeping. And I said, why? Why does it hurt me so deeply? And all I could think was, कि आपने एक लकीर खींच दी. You drew a line. between the hearts of a people, the hearts of a family, right down. You ripped them in the center. And that's all it was, right? Without thought, really. It was done so coldly, so callously, without thinking of the longer term implication of it. At least I'm telling you from a layperson's perspective. That's what went through my mind. And I thought, and that's it. Overnight, we were separate from being one. And I think that I carried with me through my performance. I received a lot of love on that side when I presented my work. When I came back, because I had received so much love in Lahore, and I just felt like there were so many similarities, that I came back and I wanted to explore the fact of Roy Asibi, Roy Tusibi, and I started to then. I found your website. I started to look for oral histories. I wanted narratives that were not born out of history books or academics, really. I wanted narratives that were born out of truth, out of people's truths, out of realities, out of what they went through. And the more I searched, the more I found absolutely moving, heart-wrenching, heart-breaking stories, but also stories of friendship, also stories of kindness. And it was funny, when I started the project, I didn't know what was going to happen, but as I found more and more, it started to take shape. I mean, I'm going to let you speak in between, and then I can tell you more about the project. But, I could keep talking about this because it's so close to my heart.
No, definitely. And I think you should keep talking about it. That story of how you crossed the border was so absolutely moving. I'd also love to know, what kind of stories did you hear growing up from your parents and grandparents?
So the interesting thing, like I told you, is I didn't hear anything negative. I heard lovely stories of this land called Dugalpura.
What were those?
No, that they lived in this amazing place, that everyone was friendly, that the Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims, everybody lived together. So I was sheltered in many ways. But when I started to try and find out more, and by then my grandmother and grandfather had passed away, so I asked my grandmother's younger sister. That's when I began to hear the stories of pain as well, because I delved. And so to me, that was also interesting that, perhaps in some ways it was the PTSD, and that's why they didn't talk about it. But also perhaps they also wanted to just hold on to the nostalgia of the good times, right? That's how you cope. It was a coping mechanism. It was also how human beings miss their land, their love, right? Their beloveds. So when my grandmother's sister told me of a story, and in fact, I think I was talking to one of the other people we had on the micro podcast about, I think it was Andrew Whitehead, right, who said that there were these wells which just filled up. But that's exactly the story my grandmother's younger sister said. She said that her mother's village, when they believed that, women's honors were at stake, or when people were coming to get the women, in order to protect the women or protect themselves, the women were committing suicide, and the well got so filled up that they couldn't kill themselves. And to them, that was a worse fate. Not dying was a worse fate than being taken away. I mean, the irony of it all, the heartbreak of it all. My Nani Masi also said, she said there was a time when her father came to her, and he said that the mob was approaching, and he said, look, Putar, and she was the only unmarried one. The other girls were married. They were either at their homes or just they were married, which meant that they were not untouched, right? So it's, again, the irony of that in itself when you hear it, that the married women are safer and the unmarried aren't. But then he said to her, he said, the mob is approaching, and I want to tell you that I may have to kill you if they come. But promise me one thing, that when I kill you, don't cry. Roi na put, mera dil tut jayega. Don't cry, because it'll break my heart. I mean, just hearing that, I get very moved. But just hearing that, imagine what her father has to go through to say that. Sorry, it's very hard to hear these stories. And the fact that I think 65 years later, Gunita, she still remembers this as one of the most difficult things that she went through, right? That stories like that, stories from the archive where there's a man called Shane Ali, that story is just, I mean, he sees his mother, his brother, everyone get killed in front of him, and then he's saved because somebody says, I want to take this child with me. I mean, what he went through, when you hear him revisit that story, you can still hear even though there's a distance in the way people tell their stories, but there's such a freshness of pain. And I think the fact that there hasn't been resolution is why there is still pain. And therefore, I also felt it was important to bring to light these stories, to bring to light the works of poets who wrote at that time. Artists are, we are the voice of people, we're the voice of society. So it is our duty to write or to sing or use our art to be the social conscience and the voice of the people. And that's what artists have always done. So artists of that time wrote up how they were heartbroken or how they hoped for a beautiful dawn, but that dawn never came. I don't think that in expecting freedom in two countries, they were expecting bloodshed, right? So that when even, and they weren't expecting also to cut ties the way they did, like, well, whether it was Ali Sardar Jafri who wrote, Isi sarhad pe kal duba tha suraj, hoke do tukre. It was exactly at this border that the sun, which was supposed to rise, set and broke into two. And he goes on to say, it broke a land of friends apart, of happiness, of joy. And then he says, I have been sitting at this very same border for years and years, waiting for that dawn. Kab se baitha hu muntazir ke kate ranjish ki shab, that this night of regret, of sadness shall disappear. And uge suraj mohabbat ka, and a dawn of love, a ray of love will and hope will perhaps seep back into our lives. And I think one of the other things I found so I also conducted quite a lot of, I had to research, and so I met a lot of people, conducted a lot of oral histories. And one of the recurring themes that I found, something that everyone said, is that we never thought we wouldn't go back. And for me, that also led me to think more and more about what it means to be a refugee and how casually over the years we are dismissive as a society and humanity about refugees. We see them as, oh God, the refugees are going to do this, or the refugees cause this problem, that trouble. It was not, nobody really stopped to think, at least not that I've seen, but which is why it was important in the performance to dwell even on one of the stories which we continue from Shane Ali speaking. It just sort of goes on to have an actor who says, refugee, and she sort of sits on those words just so that people stop to think, what does it feel like to no longer belong to your land? What does it feel like to not belong to what you knew, everything you knew to be true, your identity?
I'm going to interrupt you also, so I can ask you some, so I can probe deeper into some of the things we're saying.
Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to bring up, you talked about artists at that time being able to articulate some of the pain, some of what was going on. What I found really interesting is I've been going back recently and listening to oral histories that I did 10 years ago in 2009, 2010, when we first started. And because nobody from that time period, unfortunately, is still alive who I interviewed back then. And I'm just so glad that we got to record their stories. But I'm going to connect something that I heard in the interviews last night to what you said. So one of the people, this was interview number 13 in our 10,000 stories, this gentleman, he says at the end of his story, as we're leaving, it's in this little machine parts shop in Batala in Punjab. He was 93 years old, and we had spent about 2 hours with him. And he had wanted to document his stories, tell his story. And as we were leaving, we had packed up, and I wish, we were not packed up, that we had iPhones. We didn't have iPhones and camera phones in those days, so you couldn't just pop it open. We were carrying these huge cameras that you had to set up. So everything was packed up, and we were putting it in the cars. And he says, "Beta," and he stops me and he says, in Punjabi, pretty much, "Thank you for letting me tell my story finally." He's like, "I finally feel like I can die in peace."
My God.
So I'm just thinking, there were so many factors of why people couldn't speak. And so artists, in a way, even though it was faux pas for the person who experienced this, being a refugee and all this, for them to not be able to speak, but then the artists somehow could make it work by taking that pain and putting it in an acceptable format, in a format that was acceptable at that time. For whatever reason, there was, you couldn't speak about it. And I think that I just wanted to touch upon that because you said,
No,
artists
it's
in
true.
that time need to listen to them.
It's really interesting. If you recall, when we were speaking to Salima ji also, Faiz Ahmad Faiz says I could only write one poem. So it was hard when I think the pain was so deep. I mean, I'm imagining there was obviously that's why they couldn't even sometimes write more than that. But there have been some incredible artists. So, Gunita, when I created this performance, like I said, it was something that organically grew. It's not like I had a roadmap to it. I just knew in the general direction I wanted to go. So it starts, I eventually, in its physical form, and you've seen it, I have an actor on stage, an older lady. I use the video testimonials as a protagonist as well, and there's myself and my accompanying musicians, and we worked with an installation, a wonderful visual artist called Gopika Chofla. There have been some wonderful people, Salima Raza is the actor. I have wonderful musicians who accompany me, but we use art, theater. So from the minute you enter this space, you start to feel a sense of slight discomfort of things happening, perhaps sometimes without choice. You're grazing past memory and photographs that are hanging from the ceiling. They're brushing past your face, or there's the bleeding line installation on stage. But everything, including towards the end, where I was just, in fact, today counting, we have collected close to, I think, I don't know, maybe 2,000 postcards of peace from everyone who's ever come and seen the performance. We have video messages of peace from, either side. So it needed to be, it couldn't just be a cold performance, because it's not something that people witnessed necessarily, but people went through. So I needed this generation to in whichever way performance allowed me to experience this from a more deeper way, which is why it's called an experiential performance. It's not just some foo-foo term that I came up with, but I really wanted people to experience it, because it feels like I would be dishonoring it if I didn't make you feel the depth of what happened. It was the most cataclysmic event to happen. Mass displacement, greatest mass displacement in the history of humanity, and we still don't talk about it enough. And thanks to the Partition Archive, we do now. But so therefore, I also wanted the oral histories, the works of the poets, the other stories that we could find. We wanted to honor this legacy, because also, I mean, when I first started doing this, I think it was almost 70 years, and now it's coming to 75 years. But as you said, most of these stories have been lost, or most of the people have been lost. And a lot of these stories would have been lost if it wasn't for the efforts of the Partition Archive or other scholars who've been collecting stories. But this is such a huge part of who we are, and what our future generations need to know to learn from this, so that the same mistakes are not repeated again, so that a general, I would say, an uninformed sense of hatred that sometimes creeps up, or that people just form opinions without knowing. I'm just saying, educate yourself. Come see what happened.
Absolutely.
Hear what happened. Make your own choices. Of course, no one's forcing anything. And I do this from a completely apolitical point of view. So this performance is told through the eyes of humanity. And you are left to decide how you feel at the end of this performance, with just the facts laid out in front of you. And so, like I said, in the beginning, we start with talking of some of the facts. Then we go on to some of the stories of hope and help. And we end, hopefully, just by saying, Guftaku band na ho. Let's talk. Let's continue to keep the dialogue open. No one is saying, wow, let's solve this problem, because it's not in our hands, right? But it is in our hands to say, let's remember humanity. Let's remember kindness. Let's remember that we have a shared history. There's no denying we have a shared history, and that, we have the same genes in so many ways. So let's not deny that. And let's not deny the fact that every time we go out of the country, we do connect. So let's try and be kinder to each other and start talking.
Definitely. What do you see as the future of your performance? Are there some, as you've been doing it, I'm sure you've learned new things.
No,
there are things that are evolving. And what are some new components that you would bring in?
So, a lot of the performance works, so I'm not changing too much of it. What I do, like I said, what keeps evolving is the number of messages of peace we collect, and I do hope that at some point I can do something with those messages of peace, sort of create a bank of positivity with those messages of peace. And I might talk to you about that, but
Yeah, we need to digitize them.
yeah, and they're beautiful, just kind words. They're just kind words. And as I said, we keep forgetting the most basic virtue of humanity, which is to be kind and to remember that we're all the same at the end of the day. So there's that happens. But I mean, and I am doing, in fact, I'm doing on August 5th and 6th, the performance in Bombay, and on the 7th in New Delhi at the India Habitat Center. But I just, I just know, Gunita, as I was in conversation, surprisingly, with Neeraj Chopra, the javelin champion of India. And I think he said something which resonated with me, that you put your head down and you keep working and you don't look at anything else. And I think that's really the way I've always worked.
Yeah.
I just stay down, head down, know what you have to say, know, and go out there and say it quietly. Like I said, this is not a political performance. It's not, it doesn't point fingers at anyone. It just says that, let's accept, let's also have like, again, I'll come back to the word humanity, to see that both sides cried, and let's listen to both sides of the story, and that's it. So it is a very, very special performance for me. I do hope, my hope for it is, I hope that I can take it to as many places where the diaspora lives together, across the world, because I just feel that it's really important. Take it to schools. I mean, I had a wonderful time when I took it to a couple of colleges. It was lovely to see. I thought the children wouldn't understand it. I thought it would be too heavy for them. The number of youngsters who came and said, thank you so much. All we learn in our books is that it's just, you learn it and you don't go into too much depth because there are no oral histories. So you learn about the stroke of midnight, Lord Mountbatten, Radcliffe Line, and it's very sort of factual, but they don't learn this. And they said, now that we see it from this perspective, we can understand it better. We can understand ourselves better. So, the reaction has been very special. I do hope to keep sharing just the oral histories and honoring them. For me, really, it's, as an artist, I want to keep honoring what happened in our country. And I hope that through this, as I said, we can heal. We can look at a way forward. We can look at I am a dreamer, to quote John Lennon, that we can find some sort of way forward of peace. But I'm also going to quote Moniza ji. Salima ji had said that lovely line, which her father said, "No, ab tum hi batao aage kya kare, is ghaav ko kaise bhare." And I'm not quoting it 100% correctly, but just, yes, let's look at how we can heal.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sonam. That was really, really beautiful. Where else are you planning to take your performance, and where all have you been? What cities have you performed in so far?
So I've done a lot of cities in Delhi, in India. I've done Delhi, Bangalore, Jaipur, Bombay. I haven't done Calcutta, but we're doing Calcutta early next year. I've taken it to Muscat. We did a snippet of it in Dubai. I really would like to take it to the UK, to the US. I really think that, like I said, because the diaspora live together, it would be very interesting. I would love to take it anywhere, Gunita, that the Indians live and Pakistanis live, so that they can just see, these beautiful stories and these moving stories. I mean, whether it's even a story of things that we didn't know. And, there was a story of how, when people were moving across in caravans, the desperation, imagine that you are so desperate that you have to leave your children behind. Of the devastation that you went through mentally, physically. Those stories people don't know. People also don't know of other stories where someone who comes in contact, someone from the other side comes in contact with someone from this side, and this gentleman is saying, I haven't met my sister in 50 years, but I know she's alive. And a complete stranger decides, from a different religion, who's not your friend, decides, you know what, I'm going to help you find your sister. And he goes out of his way and searches for years and years and years, and he helps them meet. So, I just wanted to put all of this, everything that happened, on a plate for you to choose, to make your own decisions, and just honor people and what we went through.
Definitely. And it's, I think, really, really beautiful what you've done. What are your upcoming performances in the next month or two?
So like I said, on the 5th and 6th, or the 4th and 5th of August, it's at the Quorum Club in Mumbai. The same, it's called Partition Stories.
Who want to come and join you there?
It's called Partition Stories of Separation. And on the 7th of August at India Habitat Center is Partition Stories of Separation. And Gunita, honestly, I must, and I'm going to use this public forum, and I know you get very embarrassed, but I must thank you for all the support that the 1947 Partition Archive has given, not just to me by sharing so graciously the stories, which what I love specifically about what you guys do is that you understand that this belonged to an entire community. It is not. These are, as you always use the word community, and I think that that's the important thing. When all the bodies that are sort of revisiting partition can come together, then we will have that much more together of information and that much more we can give forward to future generations. So thank you for the way you guys have shared this. Thank you for the work you do in collecting these oral histories, and more through listening to oral histories on the Partition Archive, I have realized the importance personally of oral histories, and I'm able to take them and put them forward. And to anybody who's watching this program, I mean, I urge you to actually watch oral histories, because that's real stories.
Right. That's what people actually went through, as opposed to interpretation. Because there's a lot of books out there which use oral history. Maybe they'll use 10 or 15 or 20. And there will be one interpretation by the author. But I think going directly to the source is really important, because you can make your own interpretation that way.
And any author, any author will tell it from a personal point of view, which is why, like I said, when we did the performance, fortunately, because I had Gopika Chofla with me, I had Salima Raza, I had so many of these wonderful minds that I brought together, we were able to ensure that we told it completely, like I said, completely apolitically, completely neutrally. We just put it in front of you. And that in itself moved people, because the truth, and the truth always moves people, right?
Right. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining today. Looks like we're going to end on time.
Yeah, well done, Gunita.
And I guess for everybody else, please join us. This is day 47. We're going to continue tomorrow with day 48 of 75 Days of Partition, which, as you know, started on June 3rd, is ending on August 17th, 75 days between the Mountbatten Plan and the drawing of the Radcliffe Line. And Sonam Kalra, who's here with me, is usually a host of this program, a co-host with myself and Aprajita, and we will have a guest appearance with host Nur Chava. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you again tomorrow. Bye.